Okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to Conversations Over Coffee. I'm your host, Steve Wernick, Rabbi Wernick, coming to you from Toronto, Ontario, where it's very sunny, coming into my office and blocking my eyesight. But you know, it's sunny and only 4 degrees Celsius. So welcome to Canada. Beth Tzedec congregation here, and it's my pleasure to welcome my good friend, our guest today, Jerry Silverman. Jerry, most recently, before going into private practice as a consultant on branding and marketing, was the president and CEO of Jewish Federations of North America. And prior to that, he was the founding director, I think it was, of Foundations for Jewish Camp, where previous to that, he had a successful career in marketing and retail and clothing and so forth. You can look him up online and get all that information. Jerry, it's always great to see you.
Rabbi, it's always a privilege to spend time with you together, as we've spent quite a bit of time together over the last decade.
We have. It's some pretty, as we were chatting before we went live, and sometimes some pretty tense circumstances as well. But first, I want to say to you publicly, as I said privately, Mazal Tov on the latest wedding, and B'Shah Tova V'Hatzlacha on your 5th child, who will be, God willing, stand underneath the chuppah in April. Mazel Tov to you and to your entire family. And when you dance the mazinka, think of me. I'll be dancing with you.
Thank you. It's a privilege, and Bezrat Hashem, we'll all get there and be able to celebrate. Especially now, happy occasions are a beautiful thing.
They are a beautiful thing. When you and I were in, what shall we say, leadership positions of the global Jewish people, you as the CEO and president of Jewish Federations in North America, JFNA, and me at United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, in some ways the world was very different, and in many ways it seems like it was still the same. I recall addressing issues of the diaspora-Israeli relationship around issues of religious pluralism, around conversion, around Israel engagement, around the complex relationship between the diaspora and Israel in general, but also dealing with issues of concern for the unity of the Jewish people in North America as well. And one of the most profound elements of my experience with you was the rabbinic roundtable that was convened through JFNA. Do you remember what were the inspirations or the necessities that you saw to bring that table together?
Yes, Rabbi, you were part of that. Not just the roundtable, but part of the instigation. If we go back in time to summer 2010, there was a major conversion bill that was set upon the Knesset that became extremely public. It became arduous for many parties. It was potentially monopoly creating from a sense of conversion that would have effects, frankly, all over the world. And if you remember, we tried to garner, and I think we really brought together a world jury around this to both try to educate and to get feedback and advice on how to deal with this. And post that 18 days of challenge within the Knesset, where the bill ended up being frozen, with great work that you did and Rabbi Jacobs and many others, the question was, how did it play out? How did it play out for all the movements of Judaism in the U.S. because there was so much press on it. And so coming back, the question was, where is everyone? And so the instigation was to say, okay, we just dealt with this very political, emotional, challenging issue that was divisive, that we played a very public role in. Now, where is everyone? And so the concept was, let's put out an invitation to all the national rabbinic leaders for all forms of Judaism, and to frankly my surprise, the 24 invitations were all accepted.
I think to everyone's surprise.
And it was a roundtable of people from, really every national concern of rabbinical leadership, which was exciting, whether it was the Rabbinical Council of America or Chabad or others from the conservative and reform movement, as well as the Reconstructionist movement. We all came together for that first meeting, and 3.5 hours later, where we discussed the conversion issue, I think everyone around that table really learned from one another and had perceptions going in that were changed.
I remember also you asked a relational question at the beginning, which I think was very important. So that part of the intention that you had in convening that table was not just to discuss issues, but was for the people to get to know each other, with the idea that if we got to know each other, we might be more willing to stay focused on content rather than whipping things up into a frenzy. And as a result of that, Rabbi David Eliezri, who's the Chabad rabbi in Irvine, California, and represents Chabad on these national tables, he and I become very good friends. And he would always sit to my left. And so the joke always was, is the Chabad sitting to the left of the conservative movement when we sit together as a result of it. And there was other things that I recall too, as a result of those meetings, when the issue of Brit Milah came up in New York, and the ancient custom of the ultra-Orthodox of how they would draw blood, came up, and there was a question about a health concern. I don't want to get into all the details in this public forum, but what happened as a result of that is people picked up the phone and called each other in order to get deeper understandings as to what was happening. And though the progressive movements were not prepared to come out and endorse that particular practice, the public positioning was infinitely more nuanced than perhaps it would have been previously. And that was a direct outcome of those meetings.
I think the prime example was when our meeting was the night before the Aguda was going to sue the city of New York.
Right.
And one of the most beautiful dialogues was, okay, Aguda is planning to do this. They, when the New York Times calls the conservative movement office, the reform movement office, other offices, what are we going to say? What are you going to say to the New York Times reporter when they ask? And at the end of 20 minutes of discussion, the response was, any organization has the right to challenge in the courts decisions that are made. And although it's not necessarily one that is important to our agenda, we support that right. And it basically diffused any type of divisiveness that could have occurred by having that table and having that discussion. And that was what was so beautiful about it, as you're suggesting.
And it worked the other way too. When we moved the Just to clarify for people, because you and I, when we speak, we're speaking inside baseball. Rick Jacobs, who you mentioned earlier, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, is the head of the Reform movement, of the Union of Reform Judaism, and Agudat is Agudas Yisrael, which is the umbrella body of North American Haredi Jews. But it worked the other way too. When the conversation shifted to the Kotel, which I want to get to because that seems to be back in the news today. When the conversation shifted to the Kotel, we had many dialogues as a group about that. And it was fascinating that the Orthodox were very specific in their opposition to it conceptually, but from a practical perspective, kind of their non-reaction public to it was also a reaction, right? And that was, I think, only possible because of the fact that this group had been meeting for as many years as they did. I mean, we met, I think it was 3 times a month, 3 times a year, 3 or 4 times a year. And I recall it was one of the meetings that was usually always better attended because everyone found it as being important and didn't want to miss the opportunity, not only of chevra, of community, but also we all felt that there was a benefit to North American Jewry. One of the best kept secrets of North America, which of course we had to keep a secret at the time because otherwise it would have been difficult for some to be there. But it was very, very beneficial. Do you know if those meetings are still taking place?
I can't say for sure, but I believe that my successor, Eric Finkerhut, has continued the meetings and really has continued to be a facilitator for discussions between all the movements and has found it to be very rewarding. At least in my lifetime, the biggest global issue that I had the privilege to be involved with were the discussions over the Kotel. And just to remind those that might be joining us, when we think of the Kotel, we tend to have in our image the plaza where the rabbi of the Kotel runs the plaza as a national site of the Jewish people, and there's a men's davening section, a women's davening section. For more than 30 years, a group of women known as Neshot HaKotel, Women of the Wall, have been meeting on the women's side to have a women's only minyan for Rosh Chodesh, which is just once a month. And in the last 15 years, tensions around that have heated up. Something like 25 years ago, working with the government and the Supreme Court, a section in Robinson's Arch, which is south of what we envision as the Kotel, was made available for pluralistic prayer that's been run by the Masorti or the conservative movement. And then there was a time, I don't remember exactly when it happened, but Anat Hoffman, who's one of the leaders of Neshot HaKotel, was arrested for trying to bring a Torah into the women's section to read Torah in a women's only minyan. And that made it to the front page of the New York Times. And North American Jewry, chose that moment of really being quite concerned about the way in which non-Orthodox Jews were denied the ability to pray according to their own custom at the Kotel. And the issue, to make a long story short, the issue got up to the attention of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who asked Natan Sharansky, who was then the head of the Jewish Agency, to solve the problem, basically to create a solution for the Kotel that would take a place that was supposed to be a symbol of unity and was becoming a place of division. So that's a short story of what happened. The long story is
is all the intricacies of the way in which that negotiations took place, which you, Jerry, played a major role with that. What was it that, about this issue at this time that led the Jewish federations in North America, which, had never really taken such a forceful position on these kinds of issues before? I don't think we would have gone as far as we did if it weren't for the Jewish federations in North America, and if it weren't for Natan Sharansky and the Jewish Agency really adopting this as one of the primary priorities of those organizations and of global Jewry. What was it that changed?
Well, it's interesting, Steve, you talk about linkage. When federations became immersed in the 2010 conversion issue, which led then to create the roundtable, and started working, and Natan Sharansky became head of the Jewish Agency, and we started working together on some of these issues. When the Prime Minister basically assigned Natan to solve the problem, Natan was aware of our roundtable. His first meeting was with our roundtable, as you may remember. And once that took place, the relationship between federations, the Jewish Agency, and our respected rabbis together, it became clear that we would take a significant role because it was a trajectory that we had made a decision to be on beginning in 2010, was to take more of a role as a communal organization and a community building organization, that we can't shy away from challenges and issues, that we have to be part of the solution. And so that's why we partnered with Natan and yourself and others to try to add value and hopefully come up with a solution, which inevitably the team did and did a great job, although painful, but did come up with a solution that was adopted.
Yeah, it was 4 years of negotiation, sometimes even flying Israel for a day. Right after Rosh Hashanah, I think it was, before Yom Kippur.
No, it was flying in 2 days before Rosh Hashanah and getting back the day before.
Getting back the day before Rosh Hashanah, even worse. But I remember Natan at that meeting outlining his vision, which was really brilliant, as only he could have done, which was to remind us that the Kotel itself was 300 meters long, and the section that we see in the postcard is only a third of that. And so his idea was to expand the Kotel, so expand the notion of the Kotel. You have one wall for one people, but multiple ways of approaching that wall. And ultimately, that was the overall vision that we managed to knock out painfully, three major elements of, to make sure that the space itself would be built out as a dignified space of the Jewish people, of a national site of the Jewish people, that it be visible from the plaza and be signed correctly, that the security gate be redesigned in such a way that the plaza, everyone enters the plaza, and then you can decide to go to a more traditional davening space, the more pluralistic davening space, and the creation of an oversight committee that be chaired by the executive of the Jewish Agency, and have representatives of the government and the streams that were the users. The idea is that the people that are using that space should have representation on the committee. that's ultimately where we ended up. And I remember when the government voted 15-5 to adopt it. That was a great day of celebration. In your mind, what do you think happened that a year later it got tabled by the same government that had approved it? And I want to just remind everyone, and you can correct me if I'm remembering this wrong. The Haredi parties, they were aware, right? Mendelblit, who was the cabinet minister, the cabinet secretary at the time, he had the most difficult job of anybody. He had to negotiate with us, and he had to negotiate with the government, and he had to negotiate with the Antiquities Authority, and he had to negotiate with the Waqf, on the Muslim Authority too. But what do you think? What do you think happened? Looking back, why did it get tabled?
The one word is political. Once the decision was made and approved, it became more public. And, from the prime minister to announcing it to the various movements being public about it, which was appropriate, but it also hit the traditional Orthodox street. The street all of a sudden became noisy about it. The chief rabbis got involved, talking about the fact that the Rav HaKotel hadn't engaged them in the process, even though he didn't have to, but they became public. And then that pushed the Shas party and the UTJ party to realize that the street had a very strong emotional reaction to it, and so they used it as leverage, and it was just political leverage that they made threats and whatnot, and of which the prime minister at the time felt that right, wrong, or indifferent, he basically said, "I'm putting it on hold because I'm not going to deal with these threats."
He was not going to threaten the coalition over the Kotel. That's really what it came down to.
100%. It was 100% political.
And so, speaking about that politics, so there was a glimmer of hope with this new coalition, which is much broader in terms of its representation of Israeli society than Bibi's coalition. And what was fascinating for the astute observer is that Yesh Atid was the only party that actually put the Kotel and issues of religious pluralism as one of its official political planks in their platform. And even had it written into the coalition agreement about its implementation. And yet, here we are, I think it was yesterday or the day before, Times of Israel, now Ynet, and all the Israeli press are basically reporting that Prime Minister Bennett and Minister Kahana of the religious ministry are also putting it on hold. What are the politics taking place now, in your opinion, that are leading to these kinds of statements?
I don't know. I'm not involved anymore. I believe that, again, Israel's dealing with a lot of different issues right now, whether it be Iran, whether it be COVID, whether it be the economy. They're dealing with a lot of complex issues. And my belief is right now, it's just not the right timing and not the right priority for them to move this forward, that there's bigger issues and bigger fish to fry. Now, I haven't seen the word cancel. And remember, the legislation is there. It was frozen. It was not, it was absolutely not, it was
tabled.
Yeah. And it's still tabled. So my belief is it's about timing. And it also may be timing from a point of, and this is pure conjecture, from a point of Prime Minister Bennett doesn't want to necessarily take it on. But when the job share goes to Lapid, he's saying to Lapid, okay, I'm going to hold one. This is your issue, your party put in the coalition agreement. Your party should bring this forth. That's another way to look at it.
That's an interesting analysis, because what you're suggesting is that, Bennett might personally, have feelings about it one way or the other, but from a political perspective, it's probably better for him to push it off to Lapid, who's made it an official part of his plank. That way, Bennett doesn't have to take any risk of trying to push that forward.
And remember the sun deck, as you and I called it.
It was actually, as a not called it, we just all adopted the term.
But the temporary platform that was built by Bennett as diaspora minister
overnight.
That
popped up.
Surprised everybody, and he did that for Shalom Bayis, to try to just make peace and to say, hey, we're doing this. So, I'm not sure where he stands on it, and I'm not sure what all the reasons were. But my feeling is that it's probably there's a lot of things facing Israel right now, and he just doesn't want to get distracted.
In your 10 years, was it, at JFNA? Because we were in the same time frame, I think, right?
Correct.
In your 10 years at JFNA, what are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of the fact that, in that 10-year period, our institutions and our Jewish community, in my opinion, from a sense of Klal Yisrael, evolved and grew, and you saw innovations that took place. You saw collaborations that took place between different organizations, different movements. You saw an incredible dialogue going on between Israel and the diaspora. Even though there were tensions, there was always a place and spaces for dialogue, whether it be in the Knesset, whether it be in the Jewish Agency, whether it be in the municipalities, whether it be in in the diaspora and in different places. And that's through some really difficult times. I mean, remember, Rabbi, we dealt with, different political issues and negotiation issues of religion and conversion and state, but we also dealt with the fact that Israel was under fire. We cried together around the 3 boys who went missing and then were found and became friendly with the families.
We went on hospital visits during the war, during attacks, and
and so we but we still remained, and we still have the miracle of the state of Israel. During that decade, we still had different institutions that are strengthening our Jewish community, and we have an engaged Jewish community. There's a lot of talk about all the different research studies and this and that, but when I went from community to community, I still saw hope for the future and hope for the Jewish communities, and to me, that's why it was a privilege getting up every day.
And when you look at, now it's been 3 years, 4 years since you've been in that role.
2 years, 3 months, but it feels like a while.
2 years, yes. 3 months. Yeah, well, Corona makes it seem longer, I suppose.
Right. Correct.
What's still outstanding?
I'm a big believer in the concept of coexistence here in the States, and being able to reach out to our communities in a big, broad way, and in a stronger way. We saw when the Pittsburgh shootings happened, how the entire Pittsburgh community came together from every walk of life, whether it be Muslim, Christian, Jewish, etc. And it was something incredibly special. I mean, just incredibly special. As you know, one of the areas I'm involved in is with this organization, United Hatzalah in Israel, which is a first responder organization, which, you know, has medics of Muslim, Druze, Christian, Haredi, secular Jews across the board that are working together to save lives every day. And so I'm a big believer that we as a Jewish community have what it takes to be the instigator. And I'll just take one story, because I remember sitting with Governor Mike Huckabee in Israel. And I asked Mike Huckabee, when there was tragedies going on with the Coptic Christians in Egypt and what was going on with Christians in Iraq and Iran, and I said, why isn't the Christian community organizing and coming together and really taking on these issues of global nature where you're seeing genocide? And his response was very simple. He said, we have not figured out how to come together as a Christian community. We don't know how to organize. And so I believe, as you have in Toronto and other major cities, we have that ability to be the instigator, to be the light in the nations, to bring communities together in a bigger, broader way. And so I believe that's what's in front of us, to really take down the hate by bringing our communities in a broader way together.
All right. That's a beautiful wish and a note upon which to end, especially at this time of year when the larger societies in which we live focus on the light, on what brings light to the world and pushes away the darkness. And God willing, people of faith can focus on that light and come together and push away the darkness of hate and inequality and injustice that exists within our world. So thank you, Jerry. Always great to be with you, and nice to walk down memory lane with you a little bit.
For sure.
And God willing, you know, it's interesting. The conversion discussion that's taking place now is not one that we're actually opposed to. Doesn't go far enough, perhaps, for the conservative and reform movements, but if Kahana is successful, will signify a very significant change in the monopoly that the Rabbanut has on conversion in Israel, and maybe, you know, God willing, your analysis of the Kotel and Bennett and Lapid is correct, and in 6 months time, 12 months, 6 to 12 months time, when there's a change of prime ministership, if the government should last that long, we might see something else. Who knows? But as the Mishnah says, Lo alecha hamachalek mor velo libatel mamena. It's not up to you to finish the task, but neither are you free from desisting to do it. So there's always still work to be done. With that, I want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us. Be sure to tune in Wednesday evening as we welcome back Professor Stephen Burke. His topic is going to be 75 years after Nuremberg, reflection on the Nuremberg trials and their impact on history 75 years later. For many, many, many more opportunities to engage and be inspired to live a meaningful Jewish life with Beth Tzedec, check us out online, www.beth-tzedec.org. And